He came home to sell the ranch his father had defended like scripture. And the first thing Caleb Rusk saw was not ruin. It was order, straight fence wire, fresh water in the trough, new willow switches along the wash, already leafing out against the dust. And in the doorway of the old adobe house stood a woman he had never met, wiping flour from her hands as if she had been expecting him for years. Caleb had a purchase agreement folded inside his coat, a clean offer from a Santa Fe irrigation syndicate. Enough money to bury the past, close the ledger, and ride back to the rail office in Denver without ever saying his father's name again. But the stranger looked at him across the yard and said, "You must be Amos Rusk's son." Not Caleb, not Sir, his father's son. And for the first time in 18 years that name felt less like a wound and more like a summons. Caleb Rusk had not planned to stay past noon. The road from Hollow Creek climbed 5 miles through red stone and pinon scrub before it broke onto the mesa, where the Rusk place sat low against the wind. He had remembered the ranch as a place of hard edges, sun-baked walls, dry lots, a barn roof always needing patching. His father standing in the yard with a hammer in one hand and no softness anywhere visible on him. Amos Rusk had believed that a man showed love by keeping a thing alive. He had also believed that saying so ruined it. That belief had cost him his son. Caleb was 41 now, and he had spent almost half his life measuring land for other men. Rail spurs, ditch grades, mining claims, property lines no one trusted until a surveyor put a chain across them and wrote the numbers in ink. It was good work, clean work, work with rules. If a line was wrong, you measured it again. If a slope failed, you recalculated. If a record did not match the ground won. Human things had never been that forgiving. He had left the Rusk Mesa Ranch at 23 after a fight that started over water, and ended with both men saying what pride says when it wants to dress itself as truth. Caleb had wanted to lease the lower pasture to a sheep outfit and use the cash to rebuild the irrigation ditch. Amos had called it selling the heart to buy a pump. Caleb had called his father a man who loved dirt because dirt never asked to be loved back. Then he had mounted his horse and ridden off while Amos stood in the yard and watched him go. No letter followed, no apology, no visit, only time, 18 years of it. When the county clerk's notice reached Caleb in Denver, the language was simple. Amos Rusk, age 72, deceased. Only surviving heir, Caleb Rusk. Property held free and clear, subject to pending inquiry on eastern water access. A second envelope had come inside the first, from the Corbett Irrigation Company. Their letter was polite, their offer was generous, their timing was obscene. Caleb accepted that part without much feeling. Businessmen smelled death faster than coyotes. That did not surprise him. What surprised him was the ranch. It should have sagged. Instead, the main gate swung clean on new iron hinges. The trough had no green scum in it. The corral rail had been planed and reset. The roof of the smokehouse had been patched with split cedar. Someone had whitewashed the adobe walls, not prettily, not for show, but because whitewash kept the heat out and the weather from biting deeper. Someone had been choosing this place every morning. Caleb dismounted slowly. The woman in the doorway came down the 2 porch steps with the directness of someone who did not waste motion. She was in her mid-30s, maybe a little older, with dark hair braided low, brown skin weathered by sun, and the steady, practical face of a person who had learned early that panic did not finish chores. She carried no weapon. She did not need one to look unafraid. "I'm Elena Vale," she said. "I worked for your father." "Worked," Caleb repeated. "He died 6 weeks ago. I know when he died." Her expression did not change. Then you know more than he thought you would. That landed harder than he wanted it to. He looked past her into the house. The doorframe had been repaired. The threshold swept. A row of clay pots sat along the south wall, with kitchen herbs pushing through the soil. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 7 years. Caleb turned back to her. "Living in my father's house?" "Working on your father's ranch," she said. "Sleeping under his roof, because the first winter here would have killed a woman in the tack room." There was no shame in it, no pleading either. Just the facts, set down flat. "He hired you?" "He did." "For what?" "At first, cooking, cleaning, mending. Then fence repair, then livestock accounts, then ditch work." She glanced toward the wash. Near the end, mostly everything his hip would no longer let him do. Caleb heard his father's voice inside that sentence, though Amos was not there to speak it. His hip. No complaint. No naming pain. Just a body part failing like a fence post. Elena studied him for a moment, then looked at his horse. "You came a long way. There's hay in the barn and coffee on the stove. You can eat first and decide what kind of man you plan to be after." Caleb nearly disliked her for that. Then he realized he disliked that she had earned the right to say it. They ate at the same table where Caleb had once sat as a boy, with dust on his sleeves and his father's silence across from him. The room was familiar in shape and strange in everything else. A new shelf had been built beside the stove. The cracked window pane had been replaced. The old water stain in the corner had been scrubbed down and sealed. There were dried chiles hanging from a beam, a kettle polished by use, ledgers stacked neatly on the sideboard. Not a widow's room, not a servant's room, a working room, a place kept alive. Elena set beans, cornbread, and coffee on the table, then sat opposite him and ate like she had already earned the meal. She did not ask about Denver. She did not ask if he had come to grieve. After a while, Caleb said, "A company in Santa Fe wants to buy the place." "I know. They contacted you?" "They sent 2 men in January." "And you told them what?" "That dead men do not sell land, and living heirs ought to be found before vultures start measuring the fence." Caleb looked at her. She took a sip of coffee. "Your father enjoyed that answer," she said, "for about 10 minutes. Then he said it was rude." "Was it?" "Yes." The corner of Caleb's mouth moved before he could stop it. It was not a smile, but it remembered how. He looked at the ledgers. "You kept accounts?" "Your father kept accounts. I made them legible." "Meaning?" "Meaning Amos Rusk believed a note that said 3 calves, 1 full hinge, 6 pounds nails counted as bookkeeping." That almost made him laugh, almost. He reached for the nearest ledger. Elena did not stop him. Inside were 7 years of entries: feed, seed, cattle counts, labor hired, tools purchased, wages paid to Elena Vale every month in a hand that changed partway through from Amos's rough block letters to Elena's clear, disciplined script. The ranch had not become prosperous, but it had survived. In this country, survival was not a small achievement. It was a verdict. "Why stay?" Caleb asked. Elena did not answer at once. Then she said, "Because he paid fairly, because the work was honest, because I had nowhere better to go when I arrived." "And after that?" She looked around the room, not sentimental, just accurate. "After that, because some places become your responsibility before they become your home." That was the first line she said that Caleb would still remember years later. At the time, he only shut the ledger. "I'll need to see the deed," he said. "You will. And whatever arrangement my father made with you, you will see that too. And after that, I will decide what happens to the property." Elena held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "you will." There was no challenge in it. That somehow made it worse. That night, Caleb slept in his old room. At least he lay there. Sleep was a different matter. The bed had fresh sheets. The cracked plaster near the ceiling had been patched. Someone had oiled the old wooden trunk where he had once kept fishing line, marbles, and a belt buckle his father had won before Caleb was born. The room had been preserved without being made into a shrine. That unsettled him more than neglect would have. Neglect would have let him stay angry. Order asked questions. He lay in the dark and listened to the wind move around the house. It was the same mesa wind he had grown up with, dry and restless, searching for every gap in the boards. Denver had wind too, but city wind belonged to streets and smoke and train yards. This wind belonged to the land. His father had belonged to it. Caleb had spent 18 years proving he did not. The next morning, Elena was already outside when he came down. Coffee waited on the stove. His cup had been placed beside it, not poured. He noticed that. It was a small courtesy, or a boundary. Through the kitchen window he saw her at the ditch head with a shovel, clearing silt from the wooden gate that controlled the flow into the south field. Caleb took his coffee outside. "That ditch still runs?" he asked. "It runs because I clear it. My father let me think it was useless. He let many people think many things." Elena drove the shovel into mud and levered out a clotted mass of roots. Caleb watched her work. Then he said, "Who taught you ditch grade?" "Your father. He taught you that." "He taught me enough to know when the water was lying." Caleb frowned. "Water doesn't lie." "No," she said. "People do. Water only proves it." He looked down at the channel. The grade was clean. The side walls had been recut within the year. The checkboards were worn but serviceable. Whoever had done the work understood not just force but patience. "My father never explained water to me like that," he said before he could stop himself. Elena leaned on the shovel. "He said so." Caleb's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "What exactly did he say?" She looked at him as if weighing the cost of truth. "He said he taught you how to dig and forgot to teach you why the ditch mattered." The morning went quiet, not silent. There were birds in the brush, a horse blowing in the corral, water tapping against wood. But quiet opened in Caleb like a room. Elena lifted the shovel again. "You should walk the place before you sell it." "I have not said I am selling. You have a buyer's fold in your coat pocket." Caleb looked at her. She had not glanced at his coat once. "Your father carried papers that way," she said. "Important ones close to the ribs, bad ones deeper." He should have resented that. Instead, he found himself wondering how many mornings she had watched Amos Rusk reach for the wrong pocket and say nothing. They walked the ranch after breakfast. Elena led him along the south ditch, then past the wash where the willow switches had been planted in 2 staggered rows. She showed him the stonework at the bend where floods used to tear out the bank. She showed him a repaired sluice gate made from cedar because pine split too fast in that sun. She showed him the lower pasture, not rich by any Eastern standard, but thick enough to feed the cattle through spring. Caleb knew this land. He also did not. Memory had preserved it like an old map. Elena had lived in the terrain that memory had flattened. At the east corner, she stopped beside a boundary marker Caleb remembered from childhood, a waist-high stone cairn his father had rebuilt every few years after storms knocked it down. "The inquiry in the clerk's notice," Caleb said. "What is it?" Elena's face changed almost not at all, but it changed. "A water access claim. By Corbett, not in their own name, through a filing company called Mesa Verde Assessments." Caleb looked at the ditch beyond the cairn. The east spring was not large. It had never been large, but it fed the first flow into the ranch ditch. Without it, the south field became grazing dust by July. What do they claim? That the Rusk ditch crosses an abandoned community easement and that your father never had sole right to the spring. That's false. Yes. How long? 18 months. Caleb turned to her. You waited until now to tell me? I waited until you had seen the ranch with your eyes. That sounds calculated. It was. The answer was so plain that irritation had nowhere to land. Elena looked at the cairn. Your father fought it as long as he could. He paid a lawyer in Hollow Creek. He pulled old tax rolls. He tried to get the county clerk to produce the original ditch plat. The clerk delayed, then misplaced it, then found a copy with a stain across the signature. Caleb had heard enough crooked record stories to know what shape this one had. What does Corbett want with this place? He asked. The spring. One spring? One spring that lets them claim the first practical grade into this side of the valley. If they control the Rusk ditch, they can sell water access to 3 ranches below us and pressure the rest. Caleb looked across the mesa. The whole valley rearranged itself in his mind, not as memory, as survey, slope, rights, access, leverage. They offered me too much for a failing ranch, he said. They offered you too little for a water key. There it was, the thing behind the polite letter, the hand inside the glove. Elena watched him understand it. Their men came twice after your father died, she said. Once to the house, once to the spring. I sent them away the first time. The second time I fired a shotgun over the wash. Caleb looked at her. You carry a shotgun? When men come to steal water from a dead man, yes. That time he did laugh. One short crack of sound. Elena's eyes softened just a little. Then she pointed at the cairn. Your father left something for you. What? Not here. She turned back toward the house. In Amos's room, on the shelf above the narrow bed, sat a tin flour can with a leather strap buckled around it. Caleb recognized the strap. It had once held his father's field knife. Elena stood in the doorway. He told me to give you privacy. Then why are you still here? Because you look like a man who might throw it at the wall. Caleb almost told her to leave. Instead, he unbuckled the strap. Inside the flour can were 2 letters Caleb had written years ago, only 2. One sent in anger disguised as duty. One sent when a railroad acquaintance had told him Amos had been seen limping badly in town. Neither had been answered. The envelopes were soft from handling, the edges worn white. Under them was a small folded map of the ranch ditch system, drawn by Amos's hand. Not professional, not elegant, but detailed. Every gate, every drop, every stretch where the grade mattered, every repair date marked in pencil. And beneath the map was a letter, 3 pages. His father's handwriting began strong and ended smaller, as if the hand had tired before the heart did. Caleb read the first line 3 times. Caleb, I am writing because silence has become the costliest thing I ever kept. The room narrowed around him. He sat on the bed. The letter did not make Amos gentle. It did not turn him into a better man by force of death. That would have been easier. It was worse than that. It was honest. Amos wrote that he had been wrong to make the ranch into a test his son could never pass. Wrong to call fear by the name of loyalty. Wrong to treat Caleb's ideas as betrayal, because he could not bear the thought that the land might need a different kind of keeping than the kind he knew. He wrote that the day Caleb left he had wanted to call him back. Instead he had stood still, because stillness was the only dignity he trusted. He wrote, I taught you the ground because I did not know how to teach you love. That was not enough. I see that now. Caleb stopped reading there. His throat had closed. Elena was no longer in the doorway. He had not heard her leave. That too was a kindness. He finished the letter near sunset. By then the light in the room had gone red. The last paragraph was about the water claim. Amos had written that Corbett's men had found a weak place in the county office and were pressing it. That the original ditch plat mattered. That somewhere in the old mission records or county rolls there had to be proof the Rusk Spring had been held with the ranch since before Caleb was born. Then the line that changed the shape of the room. If you cannot keep the ranch, then keep the truth of it before you sell. Do not let a thief write my last line. Caleb sat there until dusk, not because he was deciding, because decision had become impossible in its old form. Downstairs, Elena had left supper covered on the stove. She was at the table with the ledger, her hair loosened at the temples, ink on the side of her hand. He put the letter beside her account book. "How much do you know?" he asked. "Enough to know he wanted you to read it without me explaining him first. He says there may be proof in mission records." "There is." Caleb stared at her. Elena opened a small notebook and slid it across the table. "I found references, not the document itself. The mission at San Aurelio kept water logs before the county existed. I asked the priest to search the archive, but he said the old boxes were damaged and not indexed." "When was this?" "Last fall, and you did not tell my father?" "I did. He wanted to ride there himself. He could not sit a horse that long anymore." Caleb read her notes, dates, names, irrigation references, a land transfer from 1869, a priest's shorthand mark beside the Rusk Spring. Enough to suggest a trail, not enough to win anything yet. "You kept this?" "I keep records." "Why?" Elena's answer came without hesitation. "Because men who steal through paper count on tired people not keeping any." For the first time since arriving, Caleb looked at her not as a complication to the sale, not as a woman standing inconveniently inside his inheritance, but as the person who had been fighting a war no one had yet named, alone, with ledgers, ditch mud, a shotgun, and patience. He sat down across from her for the Denver and Western line, he said. "Grades, claims, maps, water crossings, 18 years. I know. Did he tell you?" He bragged. The word struck him so hard he almost missed the next breath. "My father did not brag. Not to you." Elena looked back at the ledger. "He told men in town you could read land the way other men read print." He said it with that scowl of his, so some thought he was complaining. Caleb looked down at his hands. "He never wrote back, no. Why?" She closed the ledger slowly. "He said a letter gave a man too much room to lie and not enough courage to tell the truth." That sounds like something he would say to avoid writing. It was. No defense, no softening, just truth. "And you stayed with him?" "I worked with him. That isn't what I asked." Elena held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "I stayed with him. He was difficult. He was proud. He could make gratitude sound like an accusation. But he was fair, and he tried in the last years to become less impossible." Caleb let out a breath. Did he succeed? Some days. That answer hurt less than a pretty one would have. The next morning, Caleb rode to Hollow Creek. He did not bring the sale agreement. He brought Amos's ditch map, Elena's notebook, and his own field notebook from Denver, the one he had carried for years in rail camps and mining towns. The county office sat behind the mercantile in a brick room that smelled of dust, ink, and reluctance. The clerk, Samuel Pike, was a narrow man with a narrow mustache and hands too clean for the country he served. He recognized Caleb's name before Caleb introduced himself. That told Caleb plenty. "I need the Mesa Verde filing on the Rusk water inquiry," Caleb said. Pike smiled too quickly. Of course, sad business about your father. Yes, hard man, yes. Pike waited for more. Caleb gave him nothing. The filing was produced after 15 minutes, though Pike made a performance of searching. It claimed that the Rusk Spring had historically fed a public-use ditch before Amos acquired the ranch, and that the private diversion was therefore improper. Attached was a copy of a plat allegedly drawn in 1874. Caleb read it once, then again. Then he felt something inside him go cold and clean. The plat referenced the King's Crossing Bridge as a fixed landmark. Caleb knew that bridge. Every surveyor who worked the Northern Rail Spur knew it because the rail company had paid to rebuild it after a flood. The first bridge at King's Crossing had gone up in 1878, 4 years after the document claimed to exist. Caleb looked at Pike. "Do you have the original plat?" Pike adjusted his cuffs. "The archive has suffered damage over the years. That was not my question. I will have to look. I'll wait." He waited almost an hour. When Pike returned, he said the original could not be located. Caleb had expected that. What he had not expected was the mistake in the attached tax summary. It listed Amos's Eastern Water Assessment under the 1874 column. But Amos had not purchased the ranch until 1876. Someone had copied numbers backward from a later ledger and hoped no one would know enough to see it. Caleb did. He wrote it all down. Dates, contradictions, missing archive behavior, clerk response time, document condition, landmark error. Then he asked for the road commission record on King's Crossing Bridge. Pike said those were kept separately. Caleb said, "Then separate them." By noon, he had the bridge date in certified ink. By 2, he was in the office of Beatrice Sloan, the only lawyer in Hollow Creek, who had never been invited to a Corbett dinner and considered that a badge of cleanliness. She read the filing. She read Caleb's notes. Then she leaned back and said, "Your father paid a different lawyer to look at this, I know. That lawyer missed the bridge date. He did. Conveniently or stupidly, does it matter? For billing, yes. For winning, less so." Caleb decided he liked her. Beatrice tapped the paper. "This is fraud if we can establish they knew the date problem. It is pressure if we cannot. Pressure is what rich men call fraud until poor men prove it. What do you need?" "An independent survey of the ditch grade. Certified bridge records. Mission archive support if it exists. Witnesses who can testify that the Rusk Spring has been privately maintained for decades. And someone willing to have Corbett angry at them." Caleb thought of the sale agreement, the clean offer, the easy exit. Then he thought of Elena at the ditch head, teaching him in one sentence that water only proves what people lie about. "You have one," he said. Beatrice studied him. "You staying, Mr. Rusk?" Caleb looked out the window toward the mesa. "I am not leaving while a thief is holding the pen." When Caleb returned to the ranch, a black carriage stood in the yard, too polished for Hollow Creek, too clean for the road. A man in a cream linen coat stood near the porch, speaking to Elena as if kindness were a coin he expected back with interest. He was about 50, handsome in the way successful men often are when they have never had to wonder whether a room would make space for them. Elena stood on the step above him. She had made him stay in the yard. Caleb dismounted. "Mr. Rusk," the man said warmly. "Jonas Corbett?" He extended his hand. Caleb looked at it long enough for the hand to become information. Then he shook it once. "You're early," Caleb said. Corbett's smile did not change. "For what?" "For a man pretending not to know I went to the county office." Elena's eyes moved to Caleb. Only for a second, Corbett chuckled. "Direct. Your father was the same way when he was not being impossible. My father is not available for your use. That changed the air. Not much. Enough. Corbett folded his hands over the head of the cane. The cane was silver-capped, decorative. A thing chosen by a man who wanted even his limp to look like authority. I came to save you trouble, he said. Your father's affairs were tangled. The water inquiry is unpleasant. Legal work gets expensive. Ranching is worse. I understand you have a life elsewhere. I do. Then let us turn this into money and spare everyone a long quarrel. Caleb took the folded sale agreement from his coat. Corbett's eyes dropped to it. So did Elena's. Caleb held it for a moment. Then he tore it once down the center. Corbett's face stayed pleasant. His eyes did not. Caleb tore it again and again. Then he walked to the water trough, dropped the pieces in, and watched the ink bleed. My answer is no, he said. Corbett was silent for 2 breaths. Then he said, You inherited your father's sentiment. No, I inherited his ditch. I looked down, and for the first time Caleb saw her hiding a smile. Corbett stepped closer. The county record will not favor you. It already failed you. The pleasantness thinned. Careful. I am. That's why I noticed the King's Crossing Bridge wasn't built until 1878. There are moments when a man reveals himself not by anger, but by calculation. Corbett's face did that. He did not look surprised for long, but he looked surprised first. Caleb saw it. So did Elena. Old records are complicated, Corbett said. Fraud usually is. That is a dangerous word. So is theft. Corbett looked past Caleb toward the ditch, the house, the willow switches along the wash. Then he looked at Elena. You have been busy, Mrs. Vale. My hands dislike idleness. That can be unfortunate. Caleb stepped half a pace. Not enough to threaten, enough to mark the line. Corbett noticed. Keep your ranch, Mr. Rusk, he said. For now. Dry country teaches all men arithmetic. He turned to his carriage. Caleb watched until the wheels passed through the gate and the dust closed behind them. Then he let out the breath he had been holding. Elena came down the steps. You tore up a lot of money. I know you may regret it. I know that too. She looked toward the trough where pieces of the sale agreement darkened underwater. Your father would have liked the ditch line. What? I inherited his ditch. Caleb almost smiled. He would have said I made it too dramatic. He would have repeated it in town by Friday. That hurt. And warmed. Both at once. The next 6 weeks remade Caleb's life without asking permission. His survey equipment arrived from Denver in 2 wooden crates. He set the transit in the equipment shed beside his father's old augers and Elena's repaired harness hooks. That arrangement seemed absurd at first, then practical, then inevitable. He surveyed the ditch from the spring to the south field. He measured grade, flow, banks, historic cut marks, repaired structures, and the stone diversion built before his birth. He found chisel marks on the oldest gate beam that matched Amos's early ledger dates. He found a line of buried stone along the original channel that no public ditch crew would have bothered to set, because public crews did not work that carefully on private land, unless someone paid them. Amos had paid, or Amos's father had. Either way, the ground remembered. Elena worked beside him when ranch work allowed it. She learned the chain fast, faster than most assistants he had trained. She marked readings without smudging the book. She asked why a slope mattered, then remembered the answer 2 days later when a side channel tried to trick the eye. You should have been a surveyor, Caleb said one afternoon. I was busy becoming everything else. He had no answer for that. In the evenings, they sorted records at the kitchen table. Amos's ledgers, Elena's notebooks, county copies, old tax rolls, Beatrice's legal requests. Sometimes they worked 3 hours without speaking except to pass a document or correct a date. Those were the easiest hours Caleb had known in years. Not light, not simple, but clean. Shared work had a mercy in it. It gave grief a place to put its hands. One night in a cigar box behind Amos's winter shirts, Caleb found 3 carved wooden stakes. Not fence stakes, miniatures. Each one had a tiny notch pattern cut along the top like the grade markers survey crews used to sight a line. They were clumsy, too thick, sanded with more care than skill. On the bottom of one was carved a single letter, C. Caleb held it until the lamplight blurred. Elena across the room saw what it was and did not come closer. "He started those after your second letter," she said. Caleb closed his hand around the little stake. "He made survey markers?" He said a boy who measured the world should have something of home in his pocket. "Did he say that to you?" "No." Elena's voice was gentle. "He said it to the wood." Caleb turned away. There are apologies that arrive too late to be useful and still too early to be ignored. The carved stake was one of them. The mission record came 2 days before the hearing. A boy from San Aurelio rode in at dusk with a packet wrapped in oilcloth and a note from the priest apologizing for the delay. The old boxes had been damaged, yes, but one waterlog had survived inside a flower chest. Elena opened it with hands that were steady until they were not. Inside was a copy of an 1868 irrigation entry. Rusk Spring. Private maintenance, South Mesa diversion, household and stock use, signed by Father Tomas Aranda, and witnessed by 2 ranch families whose descendants still lived in the valley. Caleb read it once, then handed it to Elena. She read it standing by the stove. When she reached the signature, she sat down hard. For 7 years she had kept a dying man's place alive. For 18 months she had fought the paper shadow of a rich man's theft. And now, for the first time, the truth had a signature older than the lie. "He would have cried," she said. "Amos?" She nodded. Then she wiped one tear angrily from her cheek. "He would have gone outside first." Caleb laughed under his breath. "Yes," he said, "he would." The hearing was held in May at the Hollow Creek Courthouse. Corbett arrived with 2 lawyers from Santa Fe, 3 clerks, and the comfortable expression of a man who believed procedure was a room he owned. Caleb arrived with Beatrice Sloan, Elena Vale, 2 saddlebags of records, and a survey notebook that had never lied to anyone. The judge was a traveling circuit judge named Miriam Voss, small, gray-haired, and unsentimental. She listened the way Caleb trusted instruments, without flattery. Beatrice presented the bridge record first, then the false plat, then the water-grade survey, then the mission log. Piece by piece, the Corbett filings stopped looking like an old uncertainty and began looking like what it was. A modern trap wearing antique dust. The Santa Fe lawyer tried to suggest Caleb's survey was biased because he owned the land. Judge Voss asked Caleb to explain his method. So he did. Not with fire, with measurements, benchmarks, sight lines, chain lengths, recorded grades, repeat checks, error margin, physical markers, channel wear, landmark dating. For 20 minutes, he gave the room the only language he trusted completely, proof. When he finished, the judge looked at the Corbett table. "Do you dispute the construction date of King's Crossing Bridge?" The lawyer sat, stood again. "No, Your Honor, we dispute its relevance." Judge Voss looked over her spectacles. "I admire courage less when it is clerical." A sound moved through the gallery. Not laughter exactly. Recognition. Elena testified after that. She gave her name, her work history, and the years she had lived at the Rusk Ranch. The lawyer tried to make her position sound suspicious. A widow in a dead man's house. a paid employee protecting her room, a woman with reason to prefer one heir's decision over another. Elena waited until he finished. Then she said, "I kept records before Mr. Rusk came home. I kept them when I thought he might sell. I kept them when no one in this room cared what happened to that ditch except a sick old man and me." The courtroom went still. The lawyer asked, "And why should the court trust your records?" Elena looked at him. "Because I wrote down what happened before I knew who would need the truth." Even Beatrice stopped writing. By late afternoon, Judge Voss ruled. The Mesa Verde filing was voided. The Corbett claim was rejected. The county clerk was ordered to preserve all related documents for inquiry. The Rusk spring and ditch were confirmed with the ranch, not forever. No ruling gave forever, but for now, for enough. Outside the courthouse, people gathered as if the air itself had changed. Ranchers who had been quiet for years came to Beatrice with folded papers, water complaints, boundary notices, nuisance claims, records delayed or misplaced at convenient times. Corbett had not been beaten in the grand way storybooks prefer. He had not lost all his money. He had not confessed. He had not been dragged through town. Real men with power rarely give you endings that clean, but his method had been exposed. And exposure is a kind of weather. Once it gets into cracks, things start to split. Frank Lujan from the lower valley shook Caleb's hand and said, "Your father was hard to like, but he picked the right son to come back." Caleb looked toward Elena. "No," he said, "he picked the right witness." Elena heard him. She looked away first, not because she disliked it, because some truths need room to land. They rode home at sunset. For once, Hollow Creek Road did not feel like a road away from something. It felt like a line drawn back. The mesa turned gold under the low sun. The willows along the wash moved silver green in the wind. The adobe house waited in its shallow hollow. Smoke rising from the chimney Elena had banked that morning before they left. Caleb stopped his horse on the ridge. Elena stopped beside him. "You could still sell," she said. "I know. With the claim cleared, you'd get more. I know that too." She watched him. "Then what are you doing?" Caleb looked down at the ranch, the place his father had failed to explain. The place Elena had kept alive when no one was watching. The place he had come to turn into money because money was easier to hold than grief. "I spent 18 years drawing lines for other men," he said. "I was good at it. Maybe too good. A line is simple when it belongs to someone else, and when it belongs to you," he took a slow breath, "then you have to walk it." Elena said nothing. The wind moved between them. "I am staying," he said. "Not for a month, not just until the next filing. I am staying." She looked at him sharply then. "Not happy yet. Careful. For the ranch? For the ranch. For the ditch? For the work." He turned to her. "And because I do not want the house to go quiet after you leave." Her face changed. This time it did not hide fast enough. "Caleb, I am not asking you for an answer tonight." "Good," she said, voice a little unsteady. "Because you ask serious things like a man setting fence posts in rock." He smiled. "That is probably fair." She looked back at the ranch. "I promised Amos I would stay until you came." "You did." "I did not promise him I would stay after. No. I have been alone a long time. So have I." She nodded, not as agreement but as recognition. Below them, the house caught the last light. Elena said, "Ask me again when you are not full of courthouse victory." "I will." "Ask me after winter." "Winter? If you still want a life after February has torn the roof loose and frozen the trough, and made both of us mean, then ask." Caleb looked at her. "That sounds like a yes wearing work clothes." This time she did smile. "Do not get proud." The first winter nearly proved Elena right. A storm came in January and stayed 3 days longer than any storm had a right to stay. 2 calves froze. The south gate jammed under ice. The roof over the tool room split along a seam Caleb had sworn would hold until spring. It did not. He and Elena spent 6 hours in sleet nailing canvas over the gap while the wind tried to peel them off the ladder. By the time they came inside, his hands shook so badly he could not unbutton his coat. Elena did it for him without comment. He was too tired to thank her. She was too tired to want thanks. That night, they sat at opposite sides of the kitchen table. With coffee neither of them drank. The lamp guttered. The wall seam whistled. Caleb said something sharp about replacing the roof sooner. Elena said something sharper about men who discover the obvious only after weather explains it loudly. Then both of them went quiet. Not the punishing quiet he had known with Amos, a different one. 2 tired people refusing to make tiredness permanent. After a while, Caleb stood, found the box of wooden matches, and wedged 2 scraps of cloth into the wall seam to stop the whistle. Elena watched him. "That is not a proper repair," she said. "No. It will not last. No." The whistle softened. He sat back down. "It holds for tonight," he said. Elena looked at the seam, then at him. "Sometimes that is the work." "In March?" he asked again. "Not on the ridge, not with sunset helping. In the yard, beside the ditch head, both of them muddy to the knees, with one of the sluice boards cracked and a spring wind pushing dust into their teeth." "I still want the life," he said. Elena looked up from the broken board. "What life?" "The one after February." She studied him. There was mud on her cheek, her sleeves were rolled, her hands were raw from cold water. No woman had ever looked more beautiful to him, because beauty had stopped meaning polish and started meaning presence. "You're still difficult," she said. "Yes, you still think too long before saying the important thing. I am improving. Slowly." "Yes." She looked at the ditch, then the house, then the willow row bending in the wind. Then she said, "All right." "All right?" "Yes, Caleb, I will stay." He nodded. She nodded. Then the cracked slorge shifted, and water began spilling around their boots. Elena grabbed the hammer. "Romance later," she said. "Hold that board." He held it. They married in June under the willow trees Amos had planted along the wash. Not many people came, but everyone who came had reason to. Beatrice stood with folded arms and cried once, which she denied afterward with legal firmness. Frank Lujan brought his fiddle. The priest from San Aurelio blessed the ditch before the meal, because Elena said any priest who had found an 1868 waterlog had earned the right. The county clerk resigned before the inquiry finished. Corbett's company did not vanish. Power seldom vanishes just because it is embarrassed, but the filings stopped coming one ranch at a time. People began bringing documents to Beatrice before fear had time to isolate them. Caleb took survey work across the valley, not for free, never for free. Because free work is too easy for powerful men to dismiss, but fair and exact. By the second year, he had more work than he could do alone. He hired a young man named Mateo to help with chain work and cattle both. Mateo was 19, eager and prone to mistakes that reminded Caleb painfully of himself at that age. One afternoon, Mateo misread a grade stake and set 3 markers wrong before Caleb caught it. The boy went pale, expecting anger. Caleb looked at the line, then at the boy. "Show me how you got the reading." Mateo swallowed. "I made a fool error, probably." "Show me the fool error so we only make it once." The boy blinked. Then he showed him. Caleb explained backside and foresight until the mistake became visible instead of shameful. From the porch, Elena watched. Later she said, "You sounded like him." Caleb stiffened. Then she added, "Not the way you fear." He looked toward the equipment shed, where Amos's tools still hung beside his transit. How then? The way he might have sounded if he had learned sooner. Caleb carried that sentence with him for a long time. By the third year, the willow switches had become real trees. Their roots held the wash bank through a summer flood that would have torn the old channel open. Their shade reached the yard by late afternoon. Cattle stood under them nose to tail. Elena mended harness there. Caleb wrote survey reports there. Sometimes they sat without talking, which had become one of the languages of the house. Silence, Caleb had learned, was not the enemy. Cowardice was. Silence could be peace if the truth had already been allowed inside. On the 4th anniversary of his return, Caleb walked the full line of the ranch before dawn. He started at the spring. The water came out of the ground small and stubborn, cold even in summer, running first through stone, then cedar, then the ditch his father had cut and cursed and defended. Caleb followed it south, past the repaired gate, past the field that had held green through dry months, past the cairn where Elena had first told him about the claim, past the willow trees, now tall enough to make the morning wind visible. He carried one of Amos's carved survey stakes in his coat pocket, not as a relic, as a reminder. A stake is not the line. It only tells a man where to stand while he does the work. At the far corner, he stopped and looked back. The house sat low in the mesa light. Smoke lifted from the kitchen chimney. Elena was awake. He knew by the smoke, by the timing, by the shape of the morning itself. For 18 years, Caleb had thought leaving had made him free. Then he had thought returning had made him guilty. Both were too simple. The truth was harder and kinder. Some places do not forgive you in words. They give you work. A gate that needs rehanging. A ditch that needs clearing. A record that needs defending. A woman who tells you the truth without dressing it up. A dead father whose love arrives late, worn into maps, ledgers, trees, and wood. Caleb had not earned the ranch by coming home. Inheritance was not earning. But every morning since he had been learning how to deserve it. One measured line, one repaired board, one honest record. One day stayed through to its end. He turned from the boundary and walked back toward the house, toward the smoke, toward the light someone had put in the window, toward the life that had waited for him longer than he deserved. And this time Caleb Rusk was not coming back. He was going home.